But that raises a key point, is that it's critical that we create. If you're in an open course, the number one activity you can engage with as an individual is to create something. A podcast, a video, a resource, a map, an image, you name it. Because what happens is, let's say in a course, I mean right now as I'm presenting here, I'm creating a presentation. That's my view, and that's one opinion. Once a presentation's done, then individuals, and you'll break into groups and hold some discussions. That's where the real value comes in, because I'm presenting a one-node perspective of this topic. All of you have your own perspective and your own knowledge base that isn't reflected while I'm speaking. Once you're able to break into groups, each new idea that's shared can be created and recombined to build more complex, more advanced ideas. So there's a need in which, in learning processes, students must be creators, not only consumers of the content. So with a massively open online course, the term that's been applied to some of the courses that we've done, it's basically a space where you have multi-voiced, multi-perspective interaction. If you look at it this way, a traditional course would be, you know, a pinpoint. You have at the top, you have the educator, the instructor, the faculty member. And then from there, it cascades down. Then you have the students underneath. The faculty member is the key perspective and point of content that you have. When you begin to move to an environment where learners are actively involved in creation, each act of creation influences the way in which people interact with each other. So then what happens is the educator, the faculty member, still stays as an important node in the network, but they're not the central node anymore, because any student can create a valuable resource, and by creating that valuable resource, shift the nature of the discussion as new energy is circulated around the idea or the artifact that the individual has created. Does that make sense so far? All right, so this is what it looks like in concept. And this is based on courses, again, that we've done. And I'll just take you through this very quickly. There's basically 6 key elements. And I should mention, I started off with one image of this, and I posted to the current open course that we're doing. And they changed. I said, what do you guys think? Does this reflect this course? And there was some significant changes and feedback and comments on it. So this is really not my diagram anymore. It was a diagram that I started with, and people changed it quite a bit, which I did appreciate. I think it's much better than what it was. But if you go online, I can send you a link to the original diagram. So we have the learner at the top. We have the educator at the bottom. That's arbitrary, you know, where you locate them. So if you have a stronger ego, you can reverse that. But we have the learner and the educator, which is part of a traditional process. Then we have the act of aggregation. Now, aggregation is simply pulling ideas together. It's not really an act of creation, right? An aggregation is just saying these and these and these ideas exist. It's like using an RSS reader, such as Google Reader, to pull blog feeds together. And Grasshopper, which is software that Stephen Downes has written, we use that as well. And basically that just pulls all course-related blogs and posts into one space, which we then send out to students. Then there's the second end, which is this notion of curation. And in my eyes, teaching in a networked environment is a heavily curatorial activity, which means as an educator, you're trying to put resources together in such a way that students can understand the relationship between them. And it might be through readings, or it might be through discussions or resources that you highlight. But the key element, and this is in the center of the circle, is the need for students to create artifacts that they can then share and use for interaction with each other. So that moves away from the instructor exclusively driving the conversation to learners being more actively involved in guiding that conversation. Now, this doesn't mean that there's no such thing as an endpoint to learning. We can still have clear goals and clear targets. An educator can still know at the end of this course, students will be able to define subject X, they'll be able to do activity Y. I mean, that's a realistic expectation of any course. So we still have a clear goal, or we can have a clear goal. What we've done is distributed the process to which we get to that clear goal. It's no longer just the road that I pave as an instructor that would bring an individual to that goal. It's a course that individuals share and create together. So that's the model of interaction we're essentially looking at. So the third concept then is that openness and innovation requires high levels of creation and participation from individuals, which is one of the key problems with what you're doing right now in some regards, because you're listening, which is fine to a degree as long as it doesn't happen too long. Because what you need to do in order to understand the concepts is connect them, relate them, and discuss them. In an ideal world, you would post your notes, those of you that are taking notes, and make them publicly available, or, as some of you are likely doing, sharing ideas and concepts through Twitter, which means they can be accessed, at least in bits and pieces in the future. Now here's a problem, and I talked about this a little bit for those of you that were here last night. We're really good at pulling information apart. You know, the album has become an individual song or a 15-second soundbite. You know, the newspaper that we used to get on our doorstep in the morning has become a blog post or a direct link to a New York Times site. So we've fragmented these entities, these structures that used to organize information for us. One of the problems with that fragmentation, though, is that we need coherent knowledge in order to act meaningfully. If the information gets pulled apart and we don't weave it back together in a meaningful way, we essentially paralyze ourselves, which is the feeling you probably get when you have about 400 things to do and you really don't know where to start. That's sort of that state of incoherence that leads to a bit of a paralysis. So we need to stitch that together into some kind of coherent knowledge structure. Or perhaps, more importantly, we really need time. Right? Important ideas, big ideas, can't be understood quickly. In some cases, this concept of a slow hunch, if you've seen Stephen or read Stephen Johnson's new book, it's this notion that you need time for ideas to sort of give birth, so that we understand and even recognize their importance. And in his book, Johnson looks at a variety of illustrations, everything from Darwin to you know, different leading thinkers, whether it's Einstein or whoever, that needed time for themselves to even realize what their own ideas were. So there's a real need, I think, for individuals to take that time to incubate, to meditate, to reflect deeply on these topics, because you don't get a depth of understanding if your primary interaction with an idea is shallow and fleeting. But the question then, if you agree that we are increasingly fragmented in information, but we need coherent knowledge in order to act meaningfully, then the challenge is, well, that's very nice, George. Now, how do you want us to do that? Like, how do people then begin to create a narrative of coherence around topics that have been fragmented? And I suggest there's really two prominent ways, the second of which I'll spend a fair bit of time on looking at learning analytics. But the first one is through social systems. We do a very good job of making sense of the world socially. We do it through our discussions with others. Even something like the publication process for peer review is, to some level, a social sense-making system. We do it in classes when students have an opportunity to interact with each other. It might be a new idea to them, but they can understand it in a better context if they have the ability to interact with others and to engage with others around those ideas. And then the final, social systems are vital and they're critical for making sense of complex subject areas, which is why we need to hear voices of more students and less of a primary instructor voice in classrooms. The second approach is technological, and this is emerging, and I'll spend a good portion of time talking about this later on, but we make sense technologically. If you read, let's say, a fair number of blogs or you know, online journals, chances are you've probably discovered the joys of an RSS reader, which allows you to pull everything into one space, so you can rely on the technology to help make sense of the complexity, or at least the multiple entities that are there. The same holds true when we start to get tools that begin to know our habits and our interactions. There was a period in early 2000 where you had these intelligent agents, they would be called, where you could sort of say, this is the kind of stuff I'm interested in, and they would sort of scour the web for you and find relevant related resources to that. Simple illustration today would be Google Alerts. It's quite a bit different than the initial vision of intelligent agents, but it allows you to say, I'm interested in subject, I don't know, let's say connectivism. Why don't we go with that? I'm interested in connectivism, and if you set up a Google alert for it, every time someone posts something on the web, the public open web at least, you'll receive information or an update that this has been posted or new articles available. So the fourth concept then, and I can't overstate the importance of this, is that personal knowledge needs to be shared and interacted with. All of us have a lot of errors in our heads. And these are ideas and concepts that you know, we haven't necessarily connected fully. We perhaps have an initial reaction to a topic. We haven't taken the time to think it through deeply. But the only way that those ideas get interrogated is if we make them explicit. If we share them with others, it opens it up to error detection. And I mean, that's really the heart of the peer review process. But as I mentioned yesterday, in a lot of instances, even individuals who graduate from prominent schools, such as Harvard, in the private universe study, end up with significant fundamental flaws in their understanding of topics. And the reason that is that they've learned to play the system well rather than to interact with the knowledge that's actually a part of the system. And so students are intelligent, which means they're going to pick up very quickly what you value as an instructor, as a faculty member, and they'll give you what you value because they know you're the one that's doing the marking. But in the process, they lose a sense of knowledge as well because they may not understand what it is that they're presenting. And as I said, look at the private universe as an illustration of conceptual misunderstandings from graduates at an elite university. So it's this notion of explicitation. We need to make our ideas explicit so that they can be understood, they can be interrogated, and for that matter, once it's in some kind of a data format, it's something we can analyze in the future. You know, each data trail makes itself amenable to future interactions. And we don't know what yet. I'm not sure how many of you recall, a couple of years ago now, Wikipedia edits were tracked and evaluated for who edited a Wikipedia article by which IP address. This is stuff that had been on Wikipedia for years. The data was explicit, but no one had taken the time to analyze it. So a group of researchers did. They analyzed the data, and they discovered in certain cases, such as controversial legislature that was moving forward, or laws or legal considerations in certain countries, they could trace IP addresses back to, let's say, the Prime Minister's office or to the government's, the governing government's office. So it meant they were actively involved in trying to shape public opinion, but they were doing it sort of through a less than transparent, upright sort of manner. And that's, I think, one of the things that data does, is once it's available, in the future, someone can look back at it, interrogate it, evaluate it, build an algorithm to make sense of it, and you get a different understanding of a topic years after you thought it was perhaps a done deal. So once it's data, it's something we can analyze. And that brings to an important fifth concept, which is that computers should do what they do best, and so should people. And I think in a lot of cases, for what I've seen with technology or with e-learning implementations, that doesn't always happen. Right? In some cases, we try and make a software program do what we really need a human being for. Or in other cases, let's say lectures, for example. I mean, if you deliver the same lecture every year or 2 times a year to a different group of students, then in my eyes, that's something that should be recorded and made available so that students can access it on their own, so that you can have your discussion time in class for actually making your ideas explicit and shaping and connecting ideas with each other. But anyways, that's a key concept, is that if we will fail, I think, in the implementation of technology if we misjudge what a computer will do better than people and the other way around. There are certain social processes that we just need in order to feel connected, and in order to feel related to other people in terms of our interaction with them around learning activities.